Adventures of Maya the Bee by Valdemar Boncells. The elderly lady bee who helped the baby bee Maya when she awoke to life and slipped from her cell was called Cassandra, and commanded great respect in the hive. Those were exciting days. A rebellion had broken out in the nation of bees, which the queen was unable to suppress. While the experienced Cassandra wiped Maya's large, bright eyes and tried as best she could to arrange her delicate wings, the big hive hummed and buzzed like a threatening thunderstorm, and the baby bee found it very warm and said so to her companion. Cassandra looked about troubled, without replying. It astonished her that the child so soon found something to criticize, but really the child was right. The heat and the pushing and crowding were almost unbearable. Maya saw an endless succession of bees go by in such swarming haste that sometimes one climbed up and over another, or several rolled past together clotted in a ball. Once the queen bee approached. Cassandra and Maya were jostled aside. A drone, a friendly young fellow of immaculate appearance, came to their assistance. He nodded to Maya and stroked the shining hairs on his breast rather nervously with his foreleg. The bees used their forelegs as arms and hands. "The crash will come," he said to Cassandra. "The revolutionists will leave the city. A new queen has already been proclaimed." Cassandra scarcely noticed him. She did not even thank him for his help, and Maya felt keenly conscious that the old lady was not a bit nice to the young gentleman. The child was a little afraid to ask questions. The impressions were coming so thick and fast, they threatened to overwhelm her. The general excitement got into her blood, and she set up a fine, distinct buzzing. "What do you mean by that?" said Cassandra. "Isn't there noise enough as it is?" Maya subsided at once, and looked at Cassandra questioningly. "Come here, child. We'll see if we cannot quiet down a bit." Cassandra took Maya by her gleaming wings, which were still soft and new and marvelously transparent, and shoved her into an almost deserted corner beside a few honeycombs filled with honey. Maya stood still and held on to one of the cells. "It smells delicious here," she observed. Her remark seemed to fluster the old lady again. "You must learn to wait, child," she replied. "I have brought up several hundred young bees this spring, and given them lessons for their first flight, but I haven't come across another one that was as pert and forward as you are. You seem to be an exceptional nature." Maya blushed and stuck the two dainty fingers of her hand in her mouth. "Exceptional nature? What is an exceptional nature?" she asked shyly. "Oh, that's not nice!" cried Cassandra, referring not to Maya's question, which she had scarcely heeded, but to the child's sticking her fingers in her mouth. "Now listen very carefully to what I'm going to tell you. I can devote only a short time to you. Other baby bees have already slipped out, and the only helper I have on this floor is Turka, and Turka is dreadfully overworked, and for the last few days has been complaining of a buzzing in her ears. Sit down here." Maya obeyed with great brown eyes fastened on her teacher. "The first rule that a young bee must learn," said Cassandra, and sighed, "is that every bee, in whatever it thinks and does, must be like the other bees, and must always have the good of all in mind. In our order of society, which we have held to be the right one from time immemorial, and which couldn't have been better preserved than it has been, this rule is the one fundamental basis for the well-being of the state. Tomorrow you will fly out of the hive. An older bee will accompany you. At first you will be allowed to fly only short stretches, and you will have to observe everything very carefully, so that you can find your way back home again. Your companion will show you the 100 flowers and blossoms that yield the best nectar. You'll have to learn them by heart. This is something no bee can escape doing. Here, you may as well learn the first line right away. Clover and honeysuckle. Repeat it. Say clover and honeysuckle." "I can't," said little Maya. "It's awfully hard. I'll see the flowers later anyway." Cassandra opened her old eyes wide and shook her head. "You'll come to a bad end," she sighed. I can foresee that already." "Am I supposed later on to gather nectar all day long?" asked Maya. Cassandra fetched a deep sigh and gazed at the baby bee seriously and sadly. She seemed to be thinking of her own toilsome life. Toil from beginning to end, nothing but toil. Then she spoke in a changed voice, with a loving look in her eyes for the child. "My dear little Maya, there will be other things in your life. The sunshine, lofty green trees, flowery heaths, lakes of silver, rushing, glistening waterways, the heavens blue and radiant, and perhaps even human beings, the highest and most perfect of nature's creations. Because of all these glories, your work will become a joy. Just think, all that lies ahead of you, dear heart. You have good reason to be happy." "I'm so glad," said Maya. "That's what I want to be." Cassandra smiled kindly. In that instant, why, she did not know, she conceived a peculiar affection for the little bee, such as she could not recall ever having felt for any child bee before. And that, probably, is how it came about that she told Maya more than a bee usually hears on the first day of its life. She gave her various special bits of advice, warned her against the dangers of the wicked world, and named the bee's most dangerous enemies. At the end, she spoke long of human beings and implanted the first love for them in the child's heart, and the germ of a great longing to know them. "Be polite and agreeable to every insect you meet," she said in conclusion. "Then you will learn more from them than I have told you today. But beware of the wasps and hornets. The hornets are our most formidable enemy, and the wickedest, and the wasps are a useless tribe of thieves, without home or religion. We are a stronger, more powerful nation, while they steal and murder wherever they can. You may use your sting upon insects to defend yourself and inspire respect. But if you insert it in a warm-blooded animal, especially a human being, you will die, because it will remain sticking in the skin and will break off. So do not sting warm-blooded creatures except in dire need, and then do it without flinching or fear of death. For it is to our courage, as well as our wisdom, that we bees owe the universal respect and esteem in which we are held. And now good-bye, Maya dear. Good luck to you. Be faithful to your people and your queen." The little bee nodded yes, and returned her old monitor's kiss and embrace. She went to bed in a flutter of secret joy and excitement, and could scarcely fall asleep from curiosity. For the next day she was to know the great wide world, the sun, the sky, and the flowers. Meanwhile, the bee city had quieted down. A large part of the younger bees had now left the kingdom to found a new city, but for a long time the droning of the great swarm could be heard outside in the sunlight. It was not from arrogance or evil intent against the queen that these had quitted. It was because the population had grown to such a size that there was no longer room for all the inhabitants, and it was impossible to store a sufficient food supply of honey to feed them all over the winter. You see, according to a government treaty of long standing, a large part of the honey gathered in summer had to be delivered up to human beings, who, in return, assured the welfare of the bee state, provided for the peace and safety of the bees, and gave them shelter against the cold in winter. "The sun has risen!" The joyous call sounding in Maya's ear awoke her out of sleep the next morning. She jumped up and joined a lady working bee. "Delighted," said the lady cordially. "You may fly with me." At the gate, where there was a great pushing and crowding, they were held up by the sentinels, one of whom gave Maya the password without which no bee was admitted into the city. "Be sure to remember it," he said, "and good luck to you." Outside the city gates, a flood of sunlight assailed the little bee, a brilliance of green and gold so rich and warm and resplendent that she had to close her eyes, not knowing what to say or do from sheer delight. "Magnificent! It really is," she said to her companion. "Do we fly into that?" "Right ahead," answered the lady bee. Maya raised her little head and moved her pretty new wings. Suddenly she felt the flying board on which she had been sitting sink down, while the ground seemed to be gliding away behind, and the large green domes of the tree-tops seemed to be coming toward her. Her eyes sparkled, her heart rejoiced. "I am flying!" she cried. "It cannot be anything else. What I am doing must be flying. Why, it's splendid, perfectly splendid!" "Yes, you're flying," said the lady bee, who had difficulty in keeping up with the child. "Those are linden trees, those toward which we are flying, the lindens in our castle park. You can always tell where our city is by those lindens. But you're flying so fast, Maya." "Fast?" said Maya. "How can one fly fast enough? Oh, how sweet the sunshine smells!" "No," replied her companion, who was rather out of breath. "It's not the sunshine. It's the flowers that smell. But please don't go so fast, else I'll drop behind. Besides, at this pace you won't observe things and be able to find your way back." But little Maya, transported by the sunshine and the joy of living, did not hear. She felt as though she was darting like an arrow through a green shimmering sea of light, to greater and greater splendor. The bright flowers seemed to call to her, the still sunlit distances lured her on, and the blue sky blessed her joyous young flight. "Never again will it be as beautiful as it is today," she thought. "I can't turn back. I can't think of anything except the sun." Beneath her the gay pictures kept changing. The peaceful landscape slid by slowly in broad stretches. "The sun must be all of gold," thought the baby bee. Coming to a large garden which seemed to rest in blossoming clouds of cherry tree, hawthorn, and lilacs, she let herself down to earth, dead tired, and dropped in a bed of red tulips, where she held on to one of the big flowers. With a great sigh of bliss, she pressed herself against the blossom wall and looked up to the deep blue of the sky through the gleaming edges of the flowers. "Oh, how beautiful it is out here in the great world! 1,000 times more beautiful than in the dark hive. I'll never go back there again to carry honey or make wax. No, indeed, I'll never do that. I want to see and know the world in bloom. I am not like the other bees. My heart is meant for pleasure and surprises, experiences and adventures. I will not be afraid of any dangers. Haven't I got strength and courage and a sting?" She laughed, bubbling over with delight, and took a deep draught of nectar out of the flower of the tulip. "Grand," she thought. "It's glorious to be alive." Ah, if little Maya had had an inkling of the many dangers and hardships that lay ahead of her, she would certainly have thought twice. But never dreaming of such things, she stuck to her resolve. Soon tiredness overcame her, and she fell asleep. When she awoke, the sun was gone, twilight lay upon the land. A bit of alarm, after all. Maya's heart went a little faster. Hesitatingly, she crept out of the flower, which was about to close up for the night, and hid herself away under a leaf high up in the top of an old tree, where she went to sleep, thinking in the utmost confidence. "I'm not afraid. I won't be afraid right at the very start. The sun is coming round again, that's certain. Cassandra said so. The thing to do is to go to sleep quietly and sleep well." The Adventures of Maya the Bee by Waldemar Bonsels. Chapter 2. The House of the Rose. By the time Maya woke, it was full daylight. She felt a little chilly under her big green leaf, and stiff in her limbs, so that her first movements were slow and clumsy. Clinging to a vein of the leaf, she let her wings quiver and vibrate, to limber them up and shake off the dust. Then she smoothed her fair hair, wiped her large eyes clean, and crept warily down to the edge of the leaf, where she paused and looked around. The glory and the glow of the morning sun were dazzling. Though Maya's resting place still lay in cool shadow, the leaves overhead shone like green gold. "Oh, you glorious world!" thought the little bee. Slowly, one by one, the experiences of the previous day came back to her. all the beauties she had seen and all the risks she had run. She remained firm in her resolve not to return to the hive. To be sure, when she thought of Cassandra, her heart beat fast, though it was not very likely that Cassandra would ever find her. No, no, to her there was no joy in forever having to fly in and out of the hive, carrying honey and making wax. This was clear once and for all. She wanted to be happy and free and enjoy life in her own way. Come what might, she would take the consequences. Thus lightly thought Maya, the truth being that she had no real idea of the things that lay in store for her. Afar off in the sunshine something glimmered red. A lurking impatience seized the little bee. Moreover, she felt hungry. So courageously, with a loud joyous buzz, she swung out of her hiding place into the clear glistening air and the warm sunlight, and made straight for the red patch that seemed to nod and beckon. When she drew near, she smelled a perfume so sweet that it almost robbed her of her senses, and she was hardly able to reach the large red flower. She let herself down on the outermost of its curved petals and clung to it tightly. At the gentle tipping of the petal, a shining silver sphere almost as big as herself came rolling toward her, transparent and gleaming in all the colors of the rainbow. Maya was dreadfully frightened, yet fascinated too by the splendor of the cool silver sphere, which rolled by her, balanced on the edge of the petal, leapt into the sunshine, and fell down in the grass. Oh, oh! The beautiful ball had shivered into a score of wee pearls. Maya uttered a little cry of terror, but the tiny round fragments made such a bright, lively glitter in the grass, and ran down the blades in such twinkling, sparkling little drops, like diamonds in the lamplight, that she was reassured. She turned towards the inside of the calyx. A beetle, a little smaller than herself, with brown wing sheaths and a black breastplate, was sitting at the entrance. He kept his place unperturbed, and looked at her seriously, though by no means unamiably. Maya bowed politely. "Did the ball belong to you?" she asked, and receiving no reply, added, "I am very sorry I threw it down." "Do you mean the dewdrop?" smiled the beetle, rather superior. "You needn't worry about that. I had taken a drink already, and my wife never drinks water. She has kidney trouble. What are you doing here?" "What is this wonderful flower?" asked Maya, not answering the beetle's question. "Would you be good enough to tell me its name?" Remembering Cassandra's advice, she was as polite as possible. The beetle moved his shiny head in his dorsal plate, a thing he could do easily without the least discomfort, as his head fitted in perfectly and glided back and forth without a click. "You seem to be only of yesterday," he said, and laughed, not so very politely. Altogether, there was something about him that struck Maya as unrefined. The bees had more culture and better manners, yet he seemed to be a good-natured fellow, because seeing Maya's blush of embarrassment he softened to her childish ignorance. "It's a rose," he explained indulgently, "so now you know. We moved in 4 days ago, and since we moved in it has flourished wonderfully under our care. Won't you come in?" Maya hesitated, then conquered her misgivings and took a few steps forward. He pressed aside a bright petal. Maya entered, and she and the beetle walked beside each other through the narrow chambers with their subdued light and fragrant walls. "What a charming home!" exclaimed Maya, genuinely taken with the place. "The perfume is positively intoxicating." Maya's admiration pleased the beetle. "It takes wisdom to know where to live," he said, and smiled good-naturedly. "Tell me where you live, and I'll tell you what you're worth, says an old adage. Would you like some nectar?" "Oh," Maya burst out, "I'd love some." The beetle nodded and disappeared behind one of the walls. Maya looked about. She was happy. She pressed her cheeks and little hands against the dainty red hangings and took deep breaths of the delicious perfume, in an ecstasy of delight at being permitted to stop in such a beautiful dwelling. It certainly is a great joy to be alive, she thought. There's no comparison between the dingy, crowded stories in which the bees live and work and this house. The very quiet here is splendid. Suddenly there was a loud sound of scolding behind the walls. It was the beetle, growling excitedly in great anger. He seemed to be hustling and pushing someone along roughly, and Maya caught the following in a clear, piping voice full of fright and mortification. "Of course, because I'm alone, you dare to lay hands on me. But wait and see what you get when I bring my associates along. You are a ruffian. Very well, I am going. But remember, I called you a ruffian. You'll never forget that." The stranger's emphatic tone, so sharp and vicious, frightened Maya dreadfully. In a few moments she heard the sound of someone running out. The beetle returned and sullenly flung down some nectar. "An outrage," he said. "You can't escape those vermin anywhere. They don't allow you a moment's peace." Maya was so hungry she forgot to thank him, and took a mouthful of nectar and chewed, while the beetle wiped the perspiration from his forehead and slightly loosened his upper armor so as to catch his breath. "Who was that?" mumbled Maya, with her mouth still full. "Please empty your mouth. Finish chewing and swallowing your nectar. One can't understand a word you say." Maya obeyed, but the excited owner of the house gave her no time to repeat her question. "It was an ant," he burst out angrily. "Do those ants think we save and store up hour after hour only for them? The idea of going right into the pantry without a how do you do or a by your leave. It makes me furious. If I didn't realize that the ill-mannered creatures actually didn't know better, I wouldn't hesitate a second to call them thieves." At this he suddenly remembered his own manners. "I beg your pardon," he said, turning to Maya. "I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Peter, of the family of rose beetles." "My name is Maya," said the little bee shyly. "I am delighted to make your acquaintance." She looked at Peter closely. He was bowing repeatedly and spreading his feelers like two little brown fans. That pleased Maya immensely. "You have the most fascinating feelers," she said. "Simply sweet." "Well, yes," observed Peter, flattered. "People do think a lot of them. Would you like to see the other side?" "If I may." The rose beetle turned his fan-shaped feelers to one side and let a ray of sunlight glide over them. "Great, don't you think?" he asked. "I shouldn't have thought anything like them possible," rejoined Maya. "My own feelers are very plain." "Well, yes," observed Peter. "To each his own. By way of compensation, you certainly have beautiful eyes, and the color of your body, the gold of your body, is not to be sneezed at." Maya beamed. Peter was the first person to tell her she had any good looks. Life was great. She was happy as a lark and helped herself to some more nectar. "An excellent quality of honey," she remarked. "Take some more," said Peter, rather amazed by his little guest's appetite. "Rose juice of the first vintage. One has to be careful and not spoil one's stomach. There's some dew left, too, if you're thirsty." "Thank you so much," said Maya. "I'd like to fly now, if you will permit me." The rose beetle laughed. "Flying, always flying," he said. "It's in the blood of you bees. I don't understand such a restless way of living. There's some advantage in staying in one place, too, don't you think?" Peter courteously held the red curtain aside. "I'll go as far as our observation petal with you," he said. "It makes an excellent place to fly from." "Oh, thank you," said Maya. "I can fly from anywhere." "That's where you have the advantage over me," replied Peter. "I have some difficulty in unfolding my lower wings." He shook her hand and held the last curtain aside for her. "Oh, the blue sky!" rejoiced Maya. "Goodbye." "So long," called Peter, remaining on the top petal to see Maya rise rapidly straight up to the sky in the golden sunlight and the clear, pure air of the morning. With a sigh he returned pensive to his cool rose-dwelling, for though it was still early he was feeling rather warm. He sang his morning song to himself, and it hummed in the red sheen of the petals and the radiance of the spring day that slowly mounted and spread over the blossoming earth. Golden green our field and tree, warm in summer's glow. All is bright and fair to see, while the roses blow. What or why the world may be, who can guess or know? All my world is glad and free, while the roses blow. Brief, they say, my time of glee, with the roses I go. Yes, but life is good to me, while the roses blow. Adventures of Maya the Bee by Waldemar Bonsells. Bug and the Butterfly. Her adventure with the spider gave Maya something to think about. She made up her mind to be more cautious in the future, not to rush into things so recklessly. Cassandra's prudent warnings about the greatest dangers that threaten the bees were enough to give one pause. And there were all sorts of other possibilities, and the world was such a big place. Oh, there was a great deal to make a little bee stop and think. It was in the evening particularly, when twilight fell and the little bee was all by herself, that one consideration after another stirred her mind. But the next morning, if the sun shone, she usually forgot half the things that had bothered her the night before, and allowed her eagerness for experiences to drive her out again into the gay whirl of life. One day she met a very curious creature. It was angular and flat as a pancake, but had a rather neat design on its sheath, and whether its sheath were wings or what, she couldn't really tell. The odd little monster sat absolutely still on the shaded leaf of a raspberry bush, its eyes half closed, apparently sunk in meditation. The scent of the raspberries spread around it deliciously. Maya wanted to find out what sort of an animal it was. She flew to the next door leaf and said, "How do you do?" The stranger made no reply. "How do you do again?" And Maya gave its leaf a little tap. The flat object peeled one eye open, turned it on Maya, and said, "A bee. A world is full of bees," and closed its eye again. Unique, thought Maya, and determined to get at the stranger's secret. For now it excited her curiosity more than ever, as people often do who pay no attention to us. She tried honey. "I have plenty of honey," she said. "May I offer you some?" The stranger opened its one eye and regarded Maya contemplatively a moment or two. What is it going to say this time? Maya wondered. This time there was no answer at all. The one eye merely closed again, and the stranger sat quite still, tight on the leaf, so that you couldn't see its legs, and you'd have thought it had been pressed down flat with a thumb. Maya realized, of course, that the stranger wanted to ignore her, but you know how it is. You don't like being snubbed, especially if you haven't found out what you wanted to find out. It makes you feel so cheap. "Whoever you are," cried Maya, "permit me to inform you that insects are in the habit of greeting each other, especially when one of them happens to be a bee." The bug sat on without budging. It did not so much as open its one eye again. "It's ill," thought Maya. "How horrid to be ill on a lovely day like this. That's why it's staying in the shade, too." She flew over to the bug's leaf and sat down beside it. "Aren't you feeling well?" she asked, so very friendly. At this, the funny creature began to move away. Move is the only word to use, because it didn't walk or run or fly or hop. It went as if moved by an invisible hand. "It hasn't any legs. That's why it's so cross," thought Maya. When it reached the stem of the leaf, it stopped a second, moved on again, and to her astonishment, Maya saw that it had left behind a little brown drop. How very singular, she thought, and clapped her hand to her nose and held it tight shut. The veriest stench came from the little brown drop. Maya almost fainted. She flew away as fast as she could and seated herself on a raspberry, where she held onto her nose and shivered with disgust and excitement. "Serves you right," someone above her called, and laughed. "Why take up with a stink bug?" "Don't laugh," cried Maya. She looked up. A white butterfly had alighted overhead on the slender, swaying branch of the raspberry bush, and was slowly opening and closing its broad wings, slowly, softly, silently, happy in the sunshine. Black corners to its wings, round black marks in the center of each wing, 4 round black marks in all. Ah, how beautiful, how beautiful! Maya forgot her vexation, and she was glad, too, to talk to the butterfly. She had never made the acquaintance of one before, even though she had met a great many. "Oh," she said, "you probably are right to laugh. Was that a stink bug?" "It was," he replied, still smiling. "The sort of person to keep away from. You're probably very young still." "Well," observed Maya, "I shouldn't say I was, exactly. I've been through a great deal. But that was the first specimen of the kind I had ever come across. Can you imagine doing such a thing?" The butterfly had to laugh. "You see," he explained, "stink bugs like to keep to themselves. They are not very popular, so they use the odoriferous drop to make people take notice of them. We'd probably soon forget the fact of their existence if it were not for the drop. It serves as a reminder, and they want to be remembered no matter how." "How lovely, how exquisitely lovely your wings are," said Maya. "So delicate and white. May I introduce myself? Maya, of the nation of bees." The butterfly laid his wings together to look like only one wing standing straight up in the air. He gave a slight bow. "Fred," he said laconically. Maya couldn't gaze her fill. "Fly a little?" she asked. "Shall I fly away?" "Oh, no, I just want to see your great white wings move in the blue air. But never mind, I can wait till later. Where do you live?" "Nowhere specially. A settled home is too much of a nuisance. Life didn't get to be really delightful until I turned into a butterfly. Before that, while I was still a caterpillar, I couldn't leave the cabbage the livelong day, and all one did was eat and squabble." "Just what do you mean?" asked Maya, mystified. "I used to be a caterpillar," explained Fred. "Never!" cried Maya. Now," said Fred, pointing both feelers straight at Maya. "Everyone knows a butterfly is first a caterpillar. Even human beings know it." Maya was utterly perplexed. Could such a thing be? "You must really explain more clearly," she said. "I couldn't accept what you say just so, could I? You wouldn't expect me to." The butterfly perched beside the little bee on the slender swaying branch of the raspberry bush, and they rocked together in the morning wind. He told her how he had begun life as a caterpillar, and then one day, when he had shed his last caterpillar skin, he came out a pupa or chrysalis. "At the end of a few weeks," he continued, "I woke up out of my dark sleep and broke through the wrappings or pupa case. I can't tell you, Maya, what a feeling comes over you when, after a time like that, you suddenly see the sun again. I felt as though I were melting in a warm golden ocean, and I loved my life so that my heart began to pound." "I understand," said Maya. "I understand. I felt the same way the first time I left our humdrum city and flew out into the bright scented world of blossoms." The little bee was silent a while, thinking of her first flight. But then she wanted to know how the butterfly's large wings could grow in the small space of the pupa case. Fred explained. The wings are delicately folded together like the petals of a flower in the bud. When the weather is bright and warm, the flower must open. It cannot help itself, and its petals unfold. So with my wings, they were folded up, then unfolded. No one can resist the sun when it shines. No, no, one cannot. One cannot resist the sunshine, Maya mused, watching the butterfly as he perched in the golden light of the morning, pure white against the blue sky. People often charge us with being frivolous, said Fred. We're really happy, just that, just happy. You wouldn't believe how seriously I sometimes think about life. Tell me what all you think. Oh, said Fred, I think about the future. It's very interesting to think about the future, but I should like to fly now. The meadows on the hillside are full of yarrow and canterbury bells. Everything's in bloom. I'd like to be there, you know. This Maya understood. She understood it well, and they said good-bye and flew away in different directions, the white butterfly rocking silently as if wafted by the gentle wind, little Maya with that uneasy zoom-zoom of the bees which we hear upon the flowers on fair days and which we always recall when we think of the summer.